Okay, I guess it's official now. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who are just joining us, as my colleague Fergus said, I'm Colleen Dibby and I'm the CEO here in NALA. I'm delighted you could join us this afternoon and give us your lunch hour. So really what we're going to do today is kind of focus on and launch some research that we've conducted recently in collaboration with Trinity College, and also to kind of have conversations, both with those researchers as well as with other kind of practitioners and experts in the family learning space. But just maybe to dial it back a little bit in terms of how we got to this point today. Many of you may be aware that NALA collaborated, and I'll just hold up my prop here, on an enabling intergenerational learning family literacy report in 2020, which was researched by a previous colleague, Dr. Anne Hegarty and Maggie Feely. And that really looked at literacy practices within education and training boards. And we had a follow-on project with that research called Marking Progress. And it was in those kind of conversations about that research, we realized that there was a whole world of kind of family learning and literacy that was also happening outside of the education and training board sector. And we thought it'd be really worthwhile to firstly try and map that a little bit in terms of understanding what was happening and where it was happening, and really, to explore with those centers and those practitioners what they were doing and what they might need to support their practice. And that's really kind of the focus of the research that Trinity did. And then we thought it'd be useful then to kind of situate that research in both practice and kind of academia. So hence why we have Mary Flanagan and Joan Kiley with us today. So really the format, as Fergus mentioned, is I'm going to turn over now to Dr. Anne Devitt and Dr. Colin Ross from Trinity, who are going to take you through kind of the research. And the report is available on our website. We kind of launched it this morning, just before this. So one of my colleagues is going to put the link in the chat, but you will find it there. So they're just going to give you some highlights about that research, and then I'm going to ask them some questions, and then we'll turn over to Mary Flanagan from Limerick and Clare ETB for further conversation. And then lastly to Joan Kiley, who is Dean of Education of Curriculum and Childhood in Marine Institute of Education. And if any questions arise during this, please fire them into the chat and we'll tend to field them, and hopefully we can have some time at the end for questions and discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Anne and Colin now to present. So, Dr. Anne Devitt, over to you.
Thanks very much, Colleen. So just to say, we have literally 2 slides, Colin and I, and this will take us just through, I suppose, the methodology, what we did, and it has the numbers of how many people we talked to and so on, and then we'll move back to talking out the findings with Colleen. So I'm just going to share my screen for the slides. So, and I'll hand over to Colin to talk us through what we did.
Yeah, hello everybody. Nice to be here. It was a process, and we got a contact list from NALA of any organization that would possibly have family literacy involved in their programs. And then we went for county by county search for family literacy programs. Completion and checking of TUSLA family resource centers lists. Now we designed the questionnaire and the preliminary design and reviewed it with NALA, used Qualtrics, that software, questionnaire pilot with family literacy providers. 4, I think, or 3 or 4 got involved in that, which is really helpful for the feedback related to how we ask the questions, and then the final review. Questionnaire deployed, sent to the full email list of 227 organizations, phoned up 68 providers, mostly family resource centers, and that really helped them, to remind them about the email. Sometimes the emails were getting lost, and to get the right people, and then we sent again to the full list. So final deliverables: family literacy contact list, the questionnaire instrument, results spreadsheet, and report. So in total, 227 organizations were contacted. the 68 follow-up calls, which is really important just to get the right people, and 77 attempted responses. 12 only completed the consent and then maybe realized that wasn't appropriate, and 4 did not have the relevant programs. 48 responses completed and usable.
So I'm just going to stop sharing here, and then we'll be able to kind of talk out some of the findings with Colleen.
Yeah, so one, and I think one of the things that surprised us really maybe was the extent of the organizations. As you said, there's 227 organizations, and by no stretch of the imagination possibly did we get them all. But maybe tell us a little bit and about maybe the profile of those kind of organizations.
Yeah, well, I might hand that to Colin, because
Okay.
he was the one who was doing a lot of the contacting people directly. So Colin, do you want to take that away?
Yeah, it surprised me. I learned a lot from the contact list. A very wide variety of organizations. Some were specifically involved in literacy and family literacy, but others who are specialized with supporting disability travelers, and then other NGOs who are, also working in the community. County by county, they were spread up all over Ireland. Every county has, and every region has these organizations. So it was big geographical spread. The ones who answered the survey, there were 13 who specifically had family literacy programs, and the other 35, they did it on a needs basis.
That leads us really to kind of our next question in terms of maybe the types of needs that did get identified through the survey and the research.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose the most common answer was anything, please. So there was, a lot of organizations that, we had suggestions about the kinds of resources that would be helpful, from books to training to other, a range of other things. And probably the most common response was all of these, please. But within that, physical books actually were one thing that was quite looked for by the participants, and for book gifting also. So for like as things that they could share with their learners. Language resources were very important within the cohort. So resources for learners who had English as an additional language, but also resources in those other languages, which I think is interesting and well worth considering, about developing the kind of literacy skills across languages. And of course, professional development was something that came up there too.
And just to qualify for people, so I suppose when we were conducting the research, I think the survey went out initially in February, March, and the Ukrainian crisis kind of was really kind of kicking off at that stage. So I think, as you said, kind of, Anne, in the report, that was one of kind of the challenges and the insights in the trying to get the responses, because a lot of the family resource centres were really kind of just responding and grappling to that emerging situation. But as I said, then the need for resources in other languages really kind of came to the fore just as we were trying to finalize the research.
Yeah, very definitely. I mean, the number of people commented that they just didn't have space to reply, given the pressure they were under. But the need for languages was identified, I would say, commonly. But I'd say that was probably very high profile at the time, given the timing with the number of Ukrainian people arriving at that time. Yeah.
And maybe just one of the other things I think that we kind of noticed through the research is that we have this, extensive, cohort of organizations, over 200. But I think, one of the things that came out in the research that they themselves were at kind of maybe different levels of development, or, some were very strategic and kind of needs-based, or the understanding of the needs in their communities and respond. And then others, there was a lot of firefighting. So maybe just speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So as Colm said, a number of the participants, about 13 or so, were running family literacy programs, and they're really in-depth and fully bedded in that sector. And many of these were sharing their resources already online, developing their own resources. So very, really hugely active. And the value of all of that knowledge within the sector, it was really clear. And then there were other organizations also very resourceful and working in that sector, but kind of as a part of what they were doing. So it certainly wasn't the primary focus of what they were doing. And I think for these organizations in particular, looking to trusted resources or trusted repository for resources was seen as being very valuable. So within that overall cohort, there's this view of a richness of knowledge and resources, but perhaps that needs to be better distributed or better connected between those people who are working there. Yeah.
And I suppose in a way that kind of validated our original kind of thinking, kind of going into we kind of knew, and actually all of this was out there, but it was trying to figure out who was out there, what they were doing, and once again, what was that ecosystem like in relation to Connect. And I think you kind of summarized it there, is that we're aware there's a lot happening, but those kind of connections maybe kind of across centers, and into something centrally doesn't quite exist. And I think that led us to trying to think about what do we do next, and where might this work go. So there are some recommendations and some initial thoughts on that you might share with us.
Yeah, I think one of the key points that was made in there was the value, so in talking about professional development, for example. So while webinars were really popular, obviously, because they're so accessible and easy to be involved in, more face-to-face or collaborative environments for professional development or just for network building essentially were identified as really valuable. So I think, anything that can support and develop that, the range of collaborations happening, or just, interconnections between the different organizations through sharing of resources or a central repository of resources, or making those links that to a certain extent already exist, but bedding those in further and developing them out to groups that might be a little bit further on the fringes. I think it was one thing that would be very valuable coming from this.
And today is the first step in that, in terms of making kind of this research a little bit more public, I suppose, putting it out there and seeing, does it chime with practitioners' experience, within, their own kind of communities, and very keen to hear from people on the webinar today, if some of the findings do reflect your experience and or your own thoughts in terms of what more we can be doing, particularly to connect those dots, or provide resources, as Anne said, or professional development. So I might just pause just for a second to see if there is any particular questions or reactions from attendees before we maybe give Anne and Colin one last. Yeah,
I might just say thank you to all of the participants, because with the piloting and the completing of the questionnaire and so on, it obviously takes people a lot of time, and we certainly got a lot of support from the sector. We didn't get everybody, and people but we were happy with the reach that we managed. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'd like to echo that, because I said we kind of went into this quite blind, and particularly with COVID, but I think we were, Trinity and ourselves were really impressed, I suppose, with the scale of activity that is going on, and really thankful for the responses. And we hope that this is just the start of many conversations and kind of collaborations with family learning and literacy that's going on, kind of unseen and unnoticed to a certain extent, possibly around the country. So I don't think there's any specific kind of questions coming in at the moment. They may arise. So I just once again maybe thank Anne and Colin for their time today, and their receptivity, generosity of time, and their insights with us over it's been about a year, I think this project has been. Yeah, so delighted that we were able to kind of launch it today. So thank you again. Great. So we might turn over now to one of our very seasoned family literacy practitioners, and maybe one of our leading lights and gurus of family learning in Limerick and Clare, and that's Mary Flanagan. So Mary, so delighted you can be with us today, and I know you're under some time pressure, so we're going to motor on. So listen, what we were kind of hoping to explore with you, because you have huge amounts of experience in this space, what ideally is the environment that kind of create family learning in Ireland?
I suppose the ideal environment is relaxed, friendly, respectful of the parents. And I suppose that environment would include the information that parents.
Mary, I think you might have just inadvertently muted yourself. Mary, can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, am I
Yeah,
muted?
you just
I
managed.
must press. Okay, sorry about that. So did
you
you
were-
hear anything there?
Yes. So the important thing is about kind of particularly the relaxed environment, and I think you got cut off at information to parents.
Yes, that many parents have no idea how important they are. So the vision would be that all parents across Ireland would get that message that they are so important, especially as their child's first teacher in the 0 to 3 age group, where the impact is very long term, and that whatever their home is, that home is a very valuable learning environment. That the other area then would be where to get support. If a parent has unmet literacy needs, that they know there is support out there. And what tends to happen is they might divulge when they get to school to a homeschool teacher that they may be not able to read to their children or help with the homework. So there needs to be that link between the homeschool teacher in the DESH schools or schools in general and possibly the ETB or other providers.
And
So that it's standard across Ireland.
And given, I suppose there's, even in the last year, there's been I suppose, massive rollout of additional homeschool liaison and Jessica, your own sense of, is that helping or, in terms of what more needs to happen to make those connections, as you said, between maybe the school, the literacy service, other family learning environments that might be out there?
I suppose we're all stretched. So in Clare, we had 7 schools in DESH, and now we have 32. So our numbers of staff have remained the same. Priority has moved to Ukrainians, and our budgets are more limited. We still have to do more with less. So we're a bit stretched there. But I think from a priority point of view, we would need to have consistency across Ireland, so that whatever happens in Donegal or Waterford, Kerry or County Louth, a homeschool teacher or somebody who has a parent divulging that they need help knows where to go. And at the moment, there isn't a standard system across Ireland. So in the homeschool teachers here in Clare know there is a family learning coordinator, but it would be a priority really, I think, for myself, that each ETB would appoint a family learning coordinator in each county or large urban area, so that we're identifiable. We're the stepping stone over to further education and training, and generally people stay for a longer time after the first initial course.
And as you kind of scoped out there, Mary, there's a lot of kind of players on the pitch in terms of those kind of provisions or supports for parents, and for students. And as you say, the landscape isn't kind of consistent, but it would appear, and I think Limerick and Clare is a very good example, is that some of those structures that working in partnership to kind of connect all those pieces are really important. So in your own experience in terms of Clare, what has been that I suppose secret in terms of building those connections between the various players?
Now the homeschool teachers rotate every 5 years, so you have to constantly update people. So having a network, let's say a family learning network in your local area, is a very useful device. You could meet once a year. All those partners that Anne has mentioned and Colm could be invited along with speech and language therapists, public health nurses, migrant supports, traveller support organisations. And it's a win-win for everybody, because we're all trying to support families. Social care, social services can be invited as well, and that we can dovetail what we do to match the needs. We're currently doing that with family support workers. There's budgeting problems now. People are tight with money. They're finding it difficult. So we've designed a little model called Looking After My Family, which has cookery, which is the hook, but it's very much about budgeting and mindfulness for the parent and their child. So people are coming for the cookery, but they're getting a little bit of how to be organized so they're not cut off from electricity, or if they're not paying those bills, and linking to MABs and different agencies around. So those networks are important, would be a useful way.
Yeah, and hopefully with the kind of rollout of the adult literacy for life strategy, I mean that there is meant to be that notion of kind of mapping in each area, the opportunity to kind of bring those players together and maybe look at things thematically around family literacy, as I said, because it's that hook, and it may be a very real need, which is how do you in the current climate, how do we batch cook for our families economically, both in terms of using electricity and financially, and as you said, through that it becomes a learning opportunity for people. And would you hope that even from that kind of very current part, people might move on to a different kind of learning opportunity or kind of program?
Yeah. It's funny, what happens is people come in to learn something to help their children, and then they realize this is actually a nice environment. It's relaxed, friendly, supportive, and they see rooms as they're coming in and seeing, oh, there's computers. So I don't know anything about computers. I might like to learn about computers. Or when people are in the class, they might say, I'd love to learn about first aid. I'd love to learn how to cook better. And that generally tends to be a natural occurrence. I suppose listening and responding to what the parents want is very important. And at those stakeholder meetings, parents would be a priority at those. So it's very much identify needs, solve problems, and parents will attend then, because it's very real for them.
So any other top tips? You've mentioned a couple there, that are really kind of essential in terms of family learning about, the listening and responding to the actual needs of the parents. And maybe, as you said previously, finding that hook that might draw people in. Is there any other, I suppose, words of wisdom or advice you'd have for people that might be embarking on, some sort of family learning or program?
Certainly, I know for myself, parents are very sensitive at key times. So when children are starting preschool, primary school, and secondary school, there are really good times to reach parents. The other time would be when children are born. You get them fast, and parents feel, okay, we wouldn't need to be reading to kids until they maybe start preschool, but that 0 to 3 is so vital. And so the My Baby and Me, that was originally developed by Sligo VEC, that's a really good program where baby and toddler and the parents can attend, and we usually give them a free book, so they might get 6 or 8 books each for their family home. That's a really nice time. So from birth, starting primary, preschool, and secondary, settling into second level, parents are a lot worried about they really are concerned about how their child will cope. So responding in that way, and I think if those kind of programs could be, I suppose, put somewhere so that parents don't, or tutors don't have to reinvent them, that we have outlines for them up on our family learning website, familylearning.ie, so that they could be rolled out, so they don't have to be reinvented.
And I think that that is, one of the purposes of today is sharing that experience and say, that, as you said, you've learned a lot of really valuable lessons, have developed really incredible resources that can be adapted, for lots of circumstances. So I know Mary just put in a plug there, and Aoife, we might put it into the chat. So familylearning.ie, if people aren't aware of it, there's a lot of great resources there that people can provide. So Mary, do you have any last words of wisdom or hopes, maybe even in terms of how mutually we can grow family learning and literacy programs in Ireland?
I honestly think there should be a national campaign with billboards out there on the buses. Important, animators can do little cartoons, competition for how important the family, the parents are, and how important the home is as a learning place. Parents have no idea how important they are, especially in the 0 to 3, and that early years only kicks in at 3. That's early years provision.
Great. Well, I'm sure Helen Ryan, who's one of our staff, is listening, because Helen will always be flying the flags for campaigns. So we just need to find a minister with lots of money who's going to take it on board.
Yes.
But listen, thanks so much, Mary. And
You're
I'm going to turn now to Joan Kiley. So I think Joan's going to be swapped into the spotlight. And Joan is joining us today from the Reno Institute of Education, where she is Dean of Education, Curriculum and Childhood. So I think Mary made mention of, I suppose, trying to scope out, these lesson plans and these ways of learning and how we can all kind of adapt them. So Joan, that's why you're our last speaker today. So maybe we'd be interested in hearing from you and your own experience of working on the Storytime project. What seems to work well for working with families? And I know Mary spoke a little of this, so you might be reiterating some of her own points, but your own experience about what works with families.
Yeah, thank you. My own experience with works with families is meeting families where they're at. There was an awful lot of what Mary said that I absolutely agree with 100%, particularly her point there about families, parents have no idea about how valuable they are or important they are to children's developing literacy. And I'm just finished in the last year a piece of research that actually proved that point, if you like, where what it showed was that families who live in more privileged circumstances are very aware that if they chat to their kids, that brings on children's oral language. If they read the story to their children at night, that brings on children's oral language and brings on their thinking as well. Or if they do things like baking with their child, or go to the supermarket and making a shopping list before they go, that's really valuable as well. So people, or even after school activities, even something as simple as going for a walk in the park and gathering chestnuts and talking about autumn or about what happens in the different cycles of the year. So families whose parents are, have been lucky enough to have had a good education are very aware that everything they do in that way is really good for their child. But parents who are from less privileged backgrounds, what we found actually is they're doing the exact same things, but they have no understanding, but they don't realize that those things are important. So parents from less privileged backgrounds have said things to me like, oh, well, I'd just be playing with the children and, we'd be having a laugh together. We'd be dancing together, or we'd go on the bus and we'd be shouting out the names or calling out the names of places that we're passing, or we'd be making up stories about the neighbours or something like that, or we'd be watching some of the TV game shows together and having a laugh around that. And all of those things are really huge, are just exactly really what the more privileged families were doing. But the difference was that the parents who were from less privileged backgrounds were unaware that this was actually developing their children's language and literacy. So what has worked? So the first thing I think is, a huge boost in parent esteem in terms of celebrating what they're doing, that they are actually doing a huge amount. That's really developing their language and their literacy. The other thing, as I said, was meeting parents where they're already at. We have this term, a term called funds of knowledge. So looking at people's funds of knowledge, where they're already at and what they're already doing, and celebrating those things and trying to build on them. So I'll give you an example from the Storytime project. What we do in the Storytime project is we use homeschool liaison teachers to invite parents to come to Marino and chat about story reading. And then usually I'd read a story and to parents and just say, look, I know we all read stories. or maybe we all read stories to our children, but I'm just going to share a few ideas about how you can use story to develop children's language. And the kind of small little revelations that have come out of those practices, things like parents didn't realize you could put on a funny accent for a character, or they didn't realize that chatting about a character instead of just literally reading what's on the page, that's okay. So, so things that have worked well is just kind of finding what parents are doing well and maybe elaborating, giving them a few ideas about how they can build on children's language, particularly through story, through play, and through games. So they're my three things that parents, doing daily activities with their children, reading stories with their children, playing games, all of those things. And as I said, many parents are doing that already.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, it's building on those things that are happening in the day-to-day interactions already that parents and children have, and building maybe parents' confidence and that they are their children's first teacher, and what they are and they are modeling behavior in that. And I think a lot of what you mentioned, we have a website that NALA developed with support from the Department of Education a number of years ago, which I'm sure Claire will put into the chat, Help My Kid Learn, which has a lot of those same things in terms of, and I know it's something during lockdown, NALA, exactly, that we were saying what you could do when you're stuck in the house with your children, that you're learning together. So, and I suppose that does lead us to kind of our next question, which was obviously, COVID has had a phenomenal kind of impact on all our lives, in terms of how we do daily things and we learn, and just your own sense, maybe as an educator and also a researcher, how COVID has impacted maybe family learning, good, bad, or indifferent.
Well, I suppose that there were good things and bad things. What the research shows is that, families who, were already doing okay, that COVID didn't impact hugely on them. And then maybe families who were already struggling, COVID just made things worse for them as well. So, the fact that it was COVID is neither here nor there. It was just another kind of bad blow, if you like, to families. But I suppose there's one piece that I'm kind of heartened by, and that is that when children return to school, even though schools could see that there was a lapse in terms of children's ability to communicate, children's oral language, their social and emotional development, but what some pieces of research are showing is that children actually catch up quite quickly when they go back to school. So there was one piece that I was looking at, Bao, Q, Zhang, and Hogan 2020, and what they said was that just reading, that when children went back to school, there was a kind of a quick recovery, but also that reading books daily to children actually mitigated by 31% the loss that children were experiencing when school was closed. So imagine, just by reading a story and doing nothing else, there was a 31% improvement. So I think that's one of the things, I suppose, and the challenge is that parents might do it regularly rather than just once a month or once every 2 weeks, because all the research shows if you get involved in story reading with your child, that if you only do 5 minutes a night, every night or every second night, that's much, much better than spending an hour and a half on a book once a week. So so the research in some ways is heartening, that it is recoverable from,
But I think it's also interesting. This is more a bit of a personal experience, in that I have two daughters, and we have hundreds and thousands of books in our house, and like that, we would have read them, and they have absolutely no interest in reading for pleasure. And my husband's always like, what did we do wrong? And so it's interesting, the longitudinal impact, because it's only now that they're in their teens, late teens, that it's happened. But before that, I think maybe we went overboard in terms of too many books and reading, but it does, the seeds are planted. It's just a question of at what point do they actually bear fruit. Fergus, we might bring in the rest, because we're kind of running a little bit ahead of time, which is great. And I suppose I'd like to kind of throw maybe a couple of questions up to the panel, because I think we've touched on I suppose a range of both opportunities and challenges that are presenting us all now in terms of we have, you know, huge amount of this understanding and these skills and these resources, you know, at our disposal. But, you know, we do have a lot of challenges, you know, coming at us, be it, you know, what's happening in terms of the Ukrainians and refugees that are coming to Ireland and making Ireland their home, the financial crisis, the climate crisis, and I'm just maybe, you know, to the experts, your own thoughts in terms of, you know, what collectively, you know, we can do to kind of harness, you know, as you said, maybe Joan, you know, the funds of knowledge and skills we have and the resources, because I think, you know, I know particularly, you know, we heard it through the research that, you know, resource centres are struggling, you know, and I was listening this morning to, I think it was Claire, launch report of kind of, I suppose, you know, poverty and experiences of families in Clare, and it's not new, but you know, they're trying to figure out how best to support families that are struggling. So I'm just kind of maybe throw that out to the panel. I know, Mary, you said about an awareness campaign, but you know, and which is one, but in terms of, I think, those interventions that we may all collectively need to make, I'm just kind of curious, maybe, I don't know, who wants to start? In terms of a response, so what we do next to kind of, you know, capitalize on all that we do know. That was one of my curveball questions, Fergus. I'm sorry.
That's good. It's a good one. And we as well, Colleen, we have a couple of questions and comments coming in on the chat bar that I can read out in a bit.
Okay.
I think with the Mary Flanagan here, interventions, I suppose we can look, and again, it's important to network and see how we can dovetail, maximize the limited budget and meet the needs where we can fit the education where others don't do education, and that type of intervention.
And Mary, can I just ask you on that, because I suppose that's a lot of the work that NALA tries to do in terms of connecting that up, but particularly like when you're on the ground, you know, is that something that you even have time to do, you know, in terms of, you know, putting yourself in front of maybe, you know, a homeschool liaison officer, or maybe somebody that isn't in your immediate remit? How do you actually, you know, make that bridge to other kind of practitioners or create those networks? Is it something you have the time to do? Or does somebody...
We get requests because they know us. And can we help with traveller groups? In fact, 2 different traveller women rang looking for classes, which is unprecedented, you know. So that if you are known, traveller groups have rang, you know, different homeschool teachers ring, so that if they know where you are, and that they know that depending on the tutors we have, the funding available, matching up then a venue locally to where people are, we can deliver.
Yeah, so information is key, and I think that was one of the, I suppose, the purposes of the research we did with Trinity was we were kind of aware that these centres were out there, but were they known to each other, and you know, also then, you know, when we were aware through other projects, as you said, like the homeschool liaison network that's kind of being rolled out. It's, you know, how do we plug them in, and or making parents aware that there are these resources in their community, and slowly but surely, as you said, so those 2 traveller women will probably, the ripple effect of the 2 of them availing, you know, could be quite significant over time. Yeah,
let's say people ring up the homeschool teacher and they're wondering about speech delays. We can organise a speech and language therapist who would like to, they're delighted to get in touch with priority parents who may not engage with, when there is an identified clinical problem, they won't attend because they say themselves it's kind of too technical, the talk that they're giving to general parents, but that in an informal way they can get simple messages across that how to support. Equally, the public health nurse, if people want a short few tips on keeping their children safe, we can get the public health nurse for an hour or 2 to give some tips. So it's making those connections, and it mightn't cost us anything in terms of tutors.
Yeah, I think just to come in there about the networks, because that definitely came across from the people who responded to the survey, that the networks were hugely important. But I suppose just to, you know, once the connection is made, the cost is low, but actually building that network and building that knowledge and making those links, that does cost money. You know, I know it's in the SOLAS guidelines, you know, to resource the relationship building and the networking, but that definitely does, it requires dedication from someone who has some dedicated time to kind of do that work. Yeah.
I think certainly within the ETBs, the adult education officer needs to be on board for family learning work in order to value and understand the value of the intervention, that it has such long-term and short-term impacts on families. And we are driven also by getting people into further education and training and having numbers, but this is the stepping stone where parents who have small babies in 4 or 5 years, they can come into full-time education or part-time education, that it's making those links.
Yeah, and as you say, Mary, and I know it's contained within the new national access plan, but this notion of kind of creating that whole of education system that we do need, as you said, those stepping stones from informal community, say unaccredited education, and as you said, that then the time might become right for somebody if they want to return to education or take up a formal opportunity. But it's how do we kind of create all of those kind of range of opportunities.
A final thing I have to say is that we want to reduce barriers for parents coming into education. And one of the big barriers is a registration form that has to be completed online.
Yes.
And there is some talk, I hope, from Andrew Brownlee in SOLAS, that we can have a one-page short form for tasters or short courses, because that just puts people off completely.
Yes, the dreaded, we shall not say it, PLSS form, and the 83 fields that are required. So yes, let's hope we can make some progress there. Just wondering, maybe, do we have any other questions maybe from, or was there anything specific, Fergus, that I might have missed?
Read out one or two things, and then if anyone asks a question, they can either unmute and ask or type it in the questions box. So Nicola McCarthy was saying that homeschool community teachers, community liaison teachers are brilliant resource who can bring parents into school, and often for the first time can break the barrier or divide, particularly for the parents whose education wasn't a positive experience at the beginning. And then Joan, one of the speakers, agreed with that. She said, I agree with you, Nicola. I'd love to see homeschool community liaison teacher scheme extended to all schools. They've time for developing relationships and really understand the needs of families. So there's a comment as well from Soraya. Soraya says, hi, Soraya here from Mother Tongues. A lot of what Mary Flanagan said echoes the feedback and experiences we have with our outreach programs for the early years. Sorry, I've just scrolled down. For the early years, and it's called Language Explorers. They are creative, multilingual family workshops that attract parents who want to entertain their children, which is something quite a few of the speakers talked about. But they're hooked once they come in for other reasons. They've been the use of the home language in public, the overall well-being that it brings them. Totally agree with Joan. And looking at parents' funds of knowledge. So many connections. Great to be here, and well done in the research in the first place. So thanks, Soraya.
Can I just come in there a second? Yeah. I should say the work that Mother Tongues do to support families, it's a perfect fit for the family literacy space, and they, it's very much an integrated kind of language and literacy view. So certainly in that, people seeking out resources for English language learners or multilingual learners, they really are a wonderful resource.
Thanks, Anne. Nicola, could you just unmute Nicola McCarthy and just explain your point there, because I'm not sure who you're responding to with your last point. Would you mind unmuting and just explain?
No, I'm based in Waterford, so we're very proactive again in family learning. I would find the homeschool liaison teachers locally here are fabulous, and it isn't just the child that actually is affected. You know, when you have a situation, say for example, if you have a cookery class going on and you have the principal who will actually go in and sit down with the parents, that barrier that's broken when he comes in and he sits down, he chats, he's actually broken a lifeline that these are the parents who wouldn't come inside the front door of the school. And that has a positive impact. You have the children at the window, my mommy's in there doing whatever, my mommy's learning how to cook or whatever it is. You know, that kind of interaction, that's, you know, you couldn't buy that. But I'd go along with Mary, and I'd say Mary is probably one of the best resources, Mary Flanagan, that any organization could have. But I mean, programs that we would have done, say for example the Snuggle Stories, that just isn't in the school. It's with the libraries, it's with the community groups, it's you know, if we can work with TUSLA, we can work with the HSE. It's not just the solution on this issue, I suppose. It's in every corner of every community, that wherever we can actually physically get in and do something. And I suppose the key part of it all, I would find, is if you can be fun and creative to get the parents in, then they'll stay for the education programs. You know, then you have the long-term impact, but you must have the little carrot at the start, which is, you know, that, you know, when you see grandparents inside in the school and the parents and the dad, you know, maybe who's long-term unemployed and had no long-term vision for himself, but he's inside, whether it's in the library or wherever, and he's actually making a story sack, and that actual sack is then put into the school and it's distributed among the, you know, different families or whatever, and the pride that that parent, maybe something that they would never have experienced, you know, that gives them the positive, and the whole positivity about a positive experience does impact on, you know, them engaging with any literacy service or any literacy provision that we can actually provide. So like it's a very hard to measure the impact of just one small little thing, because it isn't one person, it's a family, it's a community, and how those people that are actually engaged and have a positive experience, whether it's in the school or the library or the community centre, that positive experience with family learning or family literacy has, you know, the string is endless, and tis only, you know, maybe at a local level the inability maybe to proceed, you know, with funding or whatever that would hold that up. But you know, you find people once they come in, they're engaged and they're bought in. They've seen it as a positive experience, and why wouldn't I try something else? Why wouldn't I stay on and do a maths program, fun learning for parents or whatever? You know, the carrot is there.
Yeah, that's great, Nicola. Yeah, I think you're, you know, reiterating a lot of what we've heard in terms of, you know, meeting parents for that and making it fun, making it relevant, and hopefully say,
Oh, Colleen, your mic is kind of freezing on us.
okay, sorry.
You're back again. It's okay.
Okay, so I was just saying, yes, I think Nicola, you kind of encapsulated a lot of what we've spoken about, making, you know, meeting parents where they're at, you know, making it fun, making it relevant, but also, you know, taking the fear and the scary factor out of education, because, you know, there's, you know, we all learn throughout our lives, and it shouldn't be this kind of precious kind of process that some people have access to and others don't. I think we have a question in the chat as well, Fergus, from Anya.
Anya Knightley is asking, hi there, apologies, my mic isn't working. Can I ask Mary Flanagan and all, do ETBs regularly sit on the child and family support networks, as all the organizations supporting families meet regularly there?
I don't know about that, possibly at a higher level than myself, but there is a group called Family Support Champions, if anybody's heard of them, and we meet the family support network staff through that. So I think they were set up by TUSLA. They gave us a huge amount of money, 3,000 for the year, and we do projects. And it's a way of networking across social care, the family support network, family support staff, and education. And so actually we do quite interesting projects out of that. We've engaged with, we bought first aid equipment boxes for traveller families in Ennistimon and got engagement through that. And that got started with the family resource network.
I think
Can I just,
yeah, I think as you said, Mary, I think this is, and this is the answer to Anya's questions, and it was one of the reasons why we kind of commissioned this research, that I don't think those level of networks and maybe representation and connection is happening consistently across the country. And interestingly, we were contacted a couple of months ago, and I'm not sure where this is coming from, but it was the Department of Equality, Children and Youth Affairs are setting up a parenting support network with representatives from all the various government departments and agencies to kind of share information. So there may be a move afoot in terms of the kind of education strategies, literacy strategies, to try and pull together the various players that are responsible for, say, education, family, whatever. But as I said, it was just this email that came out of the blue from a department, and I've linked back within them and like sharing some of our resources, and we'll share the report. So there may be more moves afoot at kind of government level to try and make these connections a little bit more kind of consistent.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Colleen, because I think that is what the system needs. We need some sort of a systemic approach to all of this. Like all of these initiatives, I haven't read Anne and Coleman's research yet, and I look forward to doing so. But if that research has kind of gathered the information about all the initiatives that are out there, that's really, really valuable, because, you know, everybody is trying to do their little bit and throwing their stone into the water. But really what we need to do is have that all together and have a systemic approach to supporting literacy, because, you know, these individual and fragmented approaches to supporting literacy, they're effective in small ways, but we really do need a systemic approach. And it's the same in schools. That's why the homeschool liaison system is so beneficial. You know, like there should be there should be teams in schools where you have your speech and language therapist, you have your social worker, you have your family literacy specialist. In an ideal world, that's the way it should work, that schools should have health teams, you know, and social support teams working there. And that kind of systemic improvement is really what we need.
Yeah, and I think as Anya kind of said in the chat that, you know, and we know to a certain extent that those structures are there, but it is about kind of making the connections between them. And it's also, you know, we're coming into a time that resources are probably going to get scarcer, and, you know, chances are there could be duplication, or, you know, and it's how do we then, you know, make the best use of the resources, which is not just the funding, but it's the people, the knowledge, the systems, and each location is going to be different. But I suppose that's what we try to do a little bit, to say, okay, we knew what was happening in ETBs, but you know, I was aware of, you know, between things that were TUSLA funded, PUBL funded, Department of Social Protection funded, and chances are, because they report into different departments, they don't necessarily connect. So at least we tried. So we came up with 227. There could be more, but that's the whole part of this research.
And
so
I suppose just to say one thing that didn't come up so much here, as far as reaching people that are hard to reach. So the human relationships are hugely valuable, obviously enough, and, you know, it takes a lot of personal contact to build that. But there's been some amazing work over COVID with online family learning. That has been so valuable, and you know, Colm and I have been working with Mary Flanagan, has done beautiful work in that field, and not to, you know, sometimes what there's value in that, you know, in the use of resources around that, even though it's so much nicer to be back together when we can be.
Can I just mention that I was just going to say about the harder to reach people? Family learning work in general is far harder work than doing literacy or ESOL, because people come in themselves. Our work is trying to encourage people who are least likely to come in the door. And in our experience, you've had to have numerous attempts are needed so that you just don't give up when you say, oh, only 2 turns up, when they've asked for English and computers, but they have asked for things that they think you want them to say. This was with a Roma group 10 years ago. And when we asked a community champion, somebody from the Roma locally, who were Czech and Slovak people, what did people really want? They said they wanted to play their music, dance their song, and dance and sing their songs. So we provided our canteen on a Saturday, and we got 4 and 5 generations of people in. And at the end of the 2-year EU project, we had 54 people engaged, in individuals engaged in different classes, but they had to come in to do something completely not what we would have thought would have been, but they were teaching their children themselves those dances and songs. They were in their own language, and we had a musician teaching, a very gendered. The boys were learning the guitars and the girls were doing the dancing. But we got them in, and you may need numerous attempts to engage those hard to reach people.
Yeah, and it bears out the point that Joan made, Mary, in terms of, that was their fund of knowledge and experience. It was their culture, and wanting to be able to kind of share that either within their community or across the generation, and that in itself, is an educational process. And it's, and then if they became more familiar then with, your premises, they might seek out another learning opportunity. We all know this. It's just having to remind kind of the powers that be that, education doesn't follow that kind of, strict linear, and sometimes you have to come at it a very different way to encourage.
It just reminded me of the Irish ourselves and what we like to do.
Yeah, go to Willie Clancy Week in Milltown Malbay every year. You'll see exactly the same thing going on. Okay, I'm conscious we're coming up to time, and people is anyone from the audience have a last question or reaction or suggestion?
There's I can read out a comment from Helen Ryan from NALA. And we need national coordination, as the 2020 report calls for, see below, and then local family literacy coordinators in each ETB, as Mary said. The 2020 report on family literacy practices in ETBs, link below, recommends an interdepartmental government group on family literacy should be set up to steer the development of national family literacy policy. The group should be representative of practitioners, community stakeholders, and family literacy experts. Thanks, Helen.
We might remind the Department of Children of that, because maybe Solace didn't quite notice that recommendation, but we can still, I recommend, because I think it is something that's been mentioned as part of the Adult Literacy for Life strategy as well, that there would be kind of thematic coalitions, whether it was on family literacy or health literacy or other, numeracy or other aspects. Okay, I'm conscious we have 1 minute left. Fergus, do you have any last housekeeping announcements, or are there any other last?
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question
Go
from
on,
the
Mary.
audience?
Sure.
So I manage Family Resource Centre in Balbriggan. My name is Louise O'Neill. So we're one of the most diverse and multicultural, youngest communities going. What I want to ask is, I think if I was right in thinking, Mary is a family learning coordinator, is that right? From ETB,
Right.
is it?
Yeah.
So all ETBs don't have these, or do they?
No, they don't.
Okay. So definitely there needs to be one of them in every community. We look for funding to do these kind of things. We do small little programs, but like you're saying, it's not enough, you're getting these pieces of money, you're running small projects, but it needs to be continuous. Also, where can we get them resources? So our parent and toddler group would really benefit from that My Baby and Me pack. So there's a lot of stuff I haven't heard of here, them kind of things. So it's about where they can be accessed and all kind of that information. Again, we have families from, English is not their first language, so
they can't read or write, their literacy issues in their own countries, never mind English, do you know what I mean? So they're just things that we have come across, and we know there's a need in our community.
Well, Louise, if you want to get in touch with us after this, we're happy, you know, to kind of point you in the direction of some resources. I mean, obviously, Mary mentioned familylearning.ie that are there. There are some others. The ETBI have set up kind of a digital library where there's a whole section of kind of family resources, and we would have some. So happy to kind of point you in the direction of resources that might be of use, and obviously hopefully maybe try and connect you with kind of relevant people within the ETB, that, you know, while there may not be a dedicated another Mary, just in terms of the other supports, if you don't have those
we have the adult education, and we've weight load, so, you know, it's just, it's the family thing that is what's missing.
And there may be opportunities out of this to kind of plug you into other family network, and that was the whole purpose of this, that, you know, for organizations like yourself that may not have a ready-made network available to, you know, what's out there collectively that you can draw from, or, you know, start building that network yourself. And so thank you. That was the whole purpose of today. So
I just think collaboration is important, because I find there's a lot of organizations doing different things. There could be repetition, but I think if we were all working together, we could all get a lot more and more quality stuff done.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, listen, I just want to echo thanks on behalf of Nala to all the panelists and to you, kind of the participants, for listening and asking questions. As I said, we hope this is, you know, just the first step in kind of, you know, building more networks and sharing information. There's a number of kind of links in the chat in relation to kind of the report that we did collectively with Trinity, along with previous reports. But as I said, hopefully this is the start of many conversations. So thanks again, everybody, for your time. Mary, safe travels up to Dublin. For those of you who might be at the ploughing tomorrow, I might see you there. If not, hopefully we'll connect at some point, be it on another webinar or in face-to-face. And 24th of November, am I right?
Yes.
Fergus, plug for
the
Nala's Family Learning Conference.
Yes, in Dublin, 24th of November, Ashton Hotel, we'll have a family learning conference. So hope to see you all there. Thanks for plugging that.
Okay, everybody, listen, have a great day. And if we didn't get to your question, or you have anything, by all means, get in touch with us here in Nala. All the best.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.